hello everyone! My name is Michał. My name is Michał. I'm a user researcher here in Poznań at a VR game studio and publisher Gamedust. I do user research for more than 10 years. I worked for more than 40 projects, ranging from indie to AAA. And okay, cool. And today I'm going to talk about VR game accessibility. Those of you who are familiar with accessibility for PC and console games will also be familiar with some of the topics I will touch today. But without further ado, let's see what we have planned for today. Well, technical issues, I believe. Yeah, cannot change the slide. Nice. Okay, three simple points for today. First, we will talk a bit about mindset I would like us to adapt for today's talk. And then we will go through three same old challenges. So basically the challenges we face in the PC and console games and things we can adapt to VR games easily. Then I will go through 6 things which are really specific to VR when it comes to game accessibility. So let's start with the mindset. So basically, when you think about game accessibility, your main motivations might be, for instance, social justice. So you want to make games equally available for everyone. Yeah, and that's a cool motivation to have. Next motivation is that when you think that there are around 1 billion people with at least one form of disability, and when you think about a USA market, that there are more than 46 million players with at least one form of disability, it's quite a big chunk of market, even when you scale it down to VR standards. And the third motivation is quite egocentric. Most of us, if not all, will need some accessibility features in the future to enjoy the games. And when it comes to mindset, I want you to adapt for today. This mindset incorporates those 3 motivations and adds something extra. But we have to start with models of disability. And the first one, medical one, we are really familiar with it. Our language is ingrained with various medical terms. So disability is basically someone's characteristic. This person is disabled in some ways. And thanks to that approach, we have various categories of disabilities and various features which are trying to respond to those categories. Luckily, we have another approach, which is called social one, and this one is more focused on interaction. So we are not focusing on the person and the characteristic of this person, but we are more focused on the barriers during the interaction of a person with a game. And thanks to that, we have various types of barriers. They can be permanent, they can be temporal or situational, so basically dependent on the context of life. To give you some kind of example of why this approach is quite cool to have and it's quite eye-opening, Piotr from 3R Games had a presentation on audio in VR games. So now let's imagine that you can't hear audio in the VR game. So you can think of the person who faces this barrier permanently. So a deaf person who cannot enjoy the audio layer. You can think about the person who faces this barrier temporarily. For instance, with ear infection. So listening to sounds in this ear usually causes a lot of pain. So Most of the time, in few weeks' time, this person will be good as new in few weeks, but today, when this person wants to play your game, this person can't enjoy audio. And situational, this is a really cool group of barriers. We can think of a new parent who usually, especially in VR, have to play the game with the sound muted or on really low volume because you want to hear what is happening with the small creature in the other room. So basically, that's the thing. And now when you think about hypothetical numbers, certainly, again, you have to scale it down for VR, you will have potentially less than 1K potential players who will be deaf. You will have few K players who are somewhat temporarily disabled, but you will have dozens K people who are new parents, especially when you take into account general game market that the players who buy games are most of the time in their mid-30s. So it's really probable that many of them will have small kids. And what this approach tells us is to try to solve barrier for one group and extend it to as many groups as you can localize. Certainly in a rational way, because you can think of many various potential groups, but you have to be mindful with this approach. Another thing is this approach is really cool for convincing your stakeholders. When you have this cool idea, oh, it would be really nice to have some accessibility features. And most of the time, your stakeholder will ask, but what we will get out of it? So yeah, that's what you get out of it. A lot of groups can be satisfied and you can deliver them better experience. Okay, so with the mindset set, we can go through 3 same old challenges, almost the same, because when it comes to VR, there are always some quirks to implementing things we know from PC and console games. So let's start with a really 3 broad categories, and we already know those 3 categories has a really good return on investment, at least for PC and console games. And most of the time, when you ask players, we will talk about the features they actually demand or request from you during playtesting sessions. So clear text and symbols. Most of the time we think about subtitles. And yeah, we will talk about subtitles. But when it comes to clear text, it's also text in the menu screens. And when it comes to symbols, in HUD you have subtitles, but you have also icons, bars, and other things. And it would be really cool to make it legible and readable. So we have 3 examples of subtitles. This one comes from Red Matter 2. This one is from Green Hell VR. And this one is from Until You Fall. So when it comes to basics about subtitling, we have to use sans serif font. And yeah, in all those cases, checked. Mixed case, so please do not use all caps, all camel cases in your subtitles. And all of them should be center aligned. To be honest, during 10 years, I was assessing one game which hadn't center aligned subtitles. They were right or left aligned, and it was a really strange view for me. Okay, next, proper contrast between text and the background. 4.5 to 1, that's our goal. As I believe, as we can see, probably the first example will have some problems with the contrast when it comes to readability. And to give you some quick and dirty tip, there are a lot of contrast checkers in the web. You just enter their values in hex for colors of the text and colors of the background, and you get the ratio. When you think about the high contrast modes for your games, especially for people with low vision, usually this ratio goes from 8 to 1 and above, but most of the time you will have to have more than 10 to 1 to make it accessible for people with low vision. Default size at least 28 pixels for MetaQuest 2, and this is really tricky because The first thing which comes to mind when you're a VR developer is like, at what distance? And we'll get to that. Someone measured it for us. I have 3 more of those, I believe. But let's keep it simple. So when you stand straight, you have this horizontal line at 0 degrees. Your maximum eye rotation, but without moving your head. So just looking up with your eyes, it's about 25 degrees above. And optimal eye rotation for looking down is about 30 degrees. Okay, everyone follows? Cool. Normal line of sight. So if there are no distractions in your field of view, it's about 12 degrees. It's a bit different for sitting and standing, but general rule is about 12 degrees. And the one thing usually we do intuitively is that from 0 to 25 and from 0 to 12, we put actual game content. So you are actually playing in this area. The most crucial stuff happens there. So the place for subtitles to make them legible and readable easily is from 12 to 30 degrees. Somewhere there, and placed in about 1.3 meters from camera. And I'm saying somewhere there because basically this distance and how many degrees in this range you will choose, it's really dependent on the lighting conditions or, for instance, color scheme of your game. So there are other factors you have to take into account. And this reminds us that we have to actually test our solutions with the target group. Okay. Subtitles on by default. It's also intuitive. Most of the games do it. Speaker identification, and I think it's barely visible here, but only until you identify speaker. It's especially important when you can't see the source of sound or the person who is speaking. And another thing about measurements, line length should be about 40 characters and maximum 2 lines to make it legible and easily readable. And that's the one part of the story. The next part of the story is you are giving people subtitles because you want them to understand something from your game or the narrative or understand some goals. So it should be easily comprehensible. And for people with attention deficits, this measurement we are talking about right now, it's really important. Let me tell you why. So another drawing. When you look at binocular vision, so this vision when you have left and right eye mixed together, let's put it that way, it's about 95 degrees when it comes to range. But when it comes to effective color recognition, the range is less than 60 degrees. So think now about HUD and putting various elements of the HUD in VR. Usually they are on the edges of the screen or in the corners of the screens. And when you only signal to your players without any disability, it's a normal seeing person, normally sighted, you might say, typically sighted, this person will not recognize any change in color. So usually we want to add some animations and other cool stuff. Another part is symbol recognition, is less than 30 degrees. So when it comes to icons with the meaning, we have to basically think about this measurement when it comes to first-time user experience. So when people actually have to learn your game, so understand what actually various icons in the HUD means. And usually this measurement is less important when they get accustomed and they get experience with your game. But basically, it reminds us that we have to intentionally direct players' attention towards various elements of HUD if we want them to efficiently learn those things. And last one, it's word recognition. Without moving your head, it's only 10 degrees. It's something like this big. So that's why we aim to fit the lines in 40 characters because it's the most easily comprehensible way to present subtitles. Okay, cool. Certainly, we can, when it comes to subtitling, we can think about many other cool things. Using color to highlight key info. Again, people with attention deficits will be really glad to have that. Text scaling. Again, any vision barriers. People usually would like to see the text. But there are also other people who are quite irritated by a really large text, so they want to make it smaller. So usually you think about at least 3 options: your default, 2 times bigger, and 2 times smaller. HUD scaling. Also, as we said, clear text and symbols, it's not only about subtitling. And closed captions. So basically, text for audio. So you have various sounds in your subtitles described. And direction indication, this is a really cool thing we can see in many FPS, PC and console titles. So you get some kind of spatial information about sounds in the game environment. Now we can move to a second channel. So always providing a second channel for crucial information in your game. Here we have example from I Expect You to Die 2. So it's a save, and yeah, we have 2 lights, green and red. It will be a really cliché example of color blindness because about 10% men, so male population in general, about 10% of us can't see colors in some way. It's not only red and green, it might be also blue, but it might be also complete monochromacy, so people can see the world only in grayscale. So the basic problem when you can't see green or red is that you see those 2 lights as various shades of yellow. And the problematic thing about providing a second channel is that some developers want to get rid of colors, so that the colors will have no meaning. So we will get rid of green and red because they are the most problematic ones. Please don't. This metaphor for red and green, like for a good thing or a bad thing to the player, it's readable and it's a cool metaphor for most of your players. Better think of providing another information. Here we have example from Control. Not sure if this is legible now, but you have additional information about state of the doors. Simple, you have symbol of a lock, and you have position, so the green light is always on the right and the red light is always on left, and that's enough to be color accessible. You don't have to deal with colors to be color accessible. Simply symbol, shape, position, whatever you may think of. And quick and dirty tip number 2. Check various scenes in grayscale. You will easily spot problems with contrast, problem with colors, the readability of your game environment. And the next thing is you can use various color blindness simulators for crucial scenes in your game. Again, it's not a substitute for playtesting with actual players, but will give you a quite good view on what is or what can be done when it comes to accessibility with your game. Okay, so a second channel is not only about colors, again, it's also about audio, the same game, and here is a cool example of a good practice of giving information if the radio is on or off. Someone can, as we know, we can't hear the radio playing, but we can easily perceive if it's on or off. And when it comes for second channel for audio, those are various visual cues, but also haptics. Haptics are quite problematic because some people, especially facing various motor barriers, may even feel pain when the haptics are on. So, but the usual best practice is to provide slider from 0 to 100% for haptics, so everyone can find the solution that fits them best. Quick and dirty tip number 3. Play through your game without audio, quite obvious, but the first thing you may want to check if you can finish the game without audio, and that's the first part of the story. And the second harder part of the story is when you play the game without audio, can you experience it as intended in the design vision? That's a more tricky part, and it's harder to achieve without audio. But you may need to subtract the channel too sometimes, so various audio layers. People may want to hear only certain aspects of audio, may face barriers when there are multiple sound sources. So that's kind of obvious, but when it comes to VR, mono sound is a really cool feature. Piotr from 3R showed us a really cool example of spatial audio and what it can achieve for a VR game. But when it comes to accessibility, mono sound is also cool. Let's think about this new parent who want to hear this small creature in the other room. Basically, switching off one channel achieves the goal. You can hear the baby and you can hear the sound in the game. What you can also observe, thanks to pandemic, we moved with playtesting to a remote setting. Many people want to hear what is happening outside the VR game, so in the real world. For instance, they are waiting for a delivery man, so they want to hear the doorbell, so they are switching audio off. The third and last area is customizable controls. And yeah, on PC and console it's really prominent. There are a lot of cool features and good practices there. What we can see in VR for the most of the time is just a control scheme. It's still cool, it's still a good practice. You don't have to memorize controls. Okay, that's fine. But when it comes to providing some kind of accessible features, we are just, I believe, starting this journey to have customizable controls. So what we've seen so far is handedness, and the basic problem in VR is that people want to switch thumbsticks. So they want to have rotation on the left thumbstick and movement on the right thumbstick, and that's the basic issue. But some games...
People, right?
Sorry?
For left-handed people, right?
Yep, for left-handed people. Sometimes it's preference, to be honest. You may be surprised that sometimes it's just a preference. That's the one part of the story. The problem with the implementation is that some games are just mirroring those thumbsticks, but some of the games switch whole controller's layout, and that may be problematic at times. Changing input behavior, this is a really cool feature. So for instance, in Green Hell VR, you can use toggle for sprint. You don't have to hold the button. When it comes to problems with the fine motor skills, it's really cool feature. And again, grab summon, toggle in until you fall, similar effect. What we will most probably see, I hope we will see, I should put it like this, are control presets. Maybe we will not give too much freedom to our players, but usually during playtesting you can spot various presets which will be useful for your audience. Control remapping, I hope we are heading that way, and looking at the handedness features and changing input behavior, we are at the right direction. But when you are doing your basic control mapping, try to avoid thumbstick buttons. It's some kind of issue we already know from console games. When it comes to gamepad, people usually don't know what L3 or R3 mean. So you have to explain. There is a button actually, on the thumbstick. And the next thing is, when it comes to various problems with the fine motor skills, clicking this button requires a lot of force and precision. So it's really hard to use for many people. Another thing we might see are alternative controllers, also gaze. We have this technology, why not use it? And speech commands. And what is most important from those three things we already know from PC and console games is to value more progress over perfection. Certainly, if you start your journey early in the production cycle, it's most probably you will end with a lot of cool accessibility features. Not only cool, but also useful for your players. But now, the things I believe we all waited for, 6 things specific to VR. And this one is like, I believe, if you are playing VR games or developing VR games, it's kinda obvious. Proper control over camera. We are all trying to battle simulator sickness. And by accident, we are providing some accessibility features. So when it comes to basics, some kind of alternatives to head tracking. Not all people can move their head freely, so those alternatives are really cool. Quick turns, snap turns with adjustable angle. And vignette options, we usually think about those as some way of battling simulator sickness. And when it comes to vignette options, people facing various cognitive barriers would be really happy. When it comes to VR, there is a lot of stimuli in this virtual environment, and some people might be overwhelmed by it. So limiting it with vignette options do the trick for them. Additional considerations: control over various effects on camera. We know this from PC and console games that some people are not keen on having camera shakes or full screen effects. And control over turn speed. Options for locomotions. Again, battling simulation sickness. So basics, free locomotion and teleportation. Vignette options for the very same reasons we mentioned before. Movement based on head versus on controller. And some additional considerations: movement speed and possibility to skip some interactions. And this one is really tricky when it comes to accessibility, because the main goal of providing accessibility features is to provide equal experience to all players. When you are giving possibility to skip something because someone can't handle it, usually you are providing a bit different experience, a lesser experience to be precise. But sometimes I believe it's the last resort. If we cannot make something accessible, I don't know, we don't have resources for that. Or maybe we just plan to make a feature and now it will be cheaper for us to make it that way. Okay, let's skip it. Why not? But be mindful with doing that. And when it comes to skipping selected interactions, I believe, in Green Hell VR, there's option to skip climbing. Why not? When it comes to various motor barriers, this one is really demanding when it comes to gross motor skills. When you think consciously about climbing in VR, there are a lot of muscles involved. Okay.
I have a comment. I think there's one more basic motion option: smooth turning and snap turning. You know what I mean? If you move your thumbstick, you should have the option to move in steps and snaps, not in smooth, because some people really don't handle smooth turning. You stand in one place and you turn around using to get the analog stick.
Yes.
It should be basic.
Totally correct. Okay, for various contexts of play, basically seated mode. We are talking about accessibility, so it's first things that might pop to your mind is, we have people who use wheelchairs, and it will be cool to have this option for them, and maybe even a possibility to adjust a height at this seated mode. The other thing with the seated mode is when it comes to various situational barriers. When you look and test with the players from USA or Canada, they have usually a big play spaces for VR. But when you playtest with people from France or UK, you will see that those play spaces are much smaller than recommended by Oculus. So it's really easy for them to hit something while playing, therefore they prefer the seated mode to be on the safe side while playing. It's nothing to do with, like, medical way of thinking about accessibility. Reachability, it's a really prominent problem, easily reaching various things. So this is a normal workspace area diagram. So basically, how to place things in your area so you can easily reach them with your hand. Whoop. And the other thing when it comes to reachability, it's a health and safety specialist nightmare. Basically, one picture shows how we should lift up things, and the second picture shows how we actually do it and how many muscles we engage while doing it. So, when it comes to the example, let's look at the I Expect You to Die 2. And generally, I believe when it comes to shell games, whenever they can, most of those areas follows the rules of the normal working space. So you don't have to make too many gross motor movements. So it's quite easy to reach various things. And the other part is, we'll see it in a moment, which you all probably already know, it's a distance grab. Simple as that. But when it comes to distance grab, it can be a really inaccessible feature in the game. So let's look how it works in Red Matter 2. First you have to, point at the thing you want to distance grab. You have to click a button and you have to make this gross motor movement. I think it's based on acceleration, so you have to have a proper acceleration. When you think about all those small movements and the precision you have to make, it's really inaccessible for people with various motor disabilities. For instance, those movements are really hard and demanding. It's speed, it's precision. I think the most simple ones from few examples here would be Green Hell VR when it comes to titles mentioned in this talk. It's really simple. You just point your head at thing and click a button and it lands in your hand. Lesser the input, more accessible the thing is. That's a general rule. But there is also another approach, and here in Until You Fall, you can see there is no need for distance grabbing, because when you have a grab button on, the weapon appears in your hand. When you stop holding it, it will dissolve. And it's a really neat way to solve the major problem for many melee combat VR games. And usually after half hour or maybe 40 minutes of playtest, people get tired of holding things in VR, so they make those micro movements. And they usually drop the weapon in their hand. And it's usually ends in the effect like, "Where's my weapon?" And in a few seconds they are dead and they have to again approach the level or the map. So they really neatly solved it, and I believe they enrich the fantasy, like the power fantasy of being a knight. And they made the feature which is accessible by design, which is, I believe, some kind of holy grail for us to design features which are just accessible. We don't need a distance grab to make it accessible. It's just accessible as it is. So now looking up and down, another thing, and mostly it's connected to level design and various VR spaces. So without headset on your head, it's about 5 kilograms pressing on your neck. When you move your head a bit down, it's get bigger and bigger and bigger. And when it comes to normally looking at things without VR, till 30 degrees, it's comfortable. Above 30 degrees, it becomes tiresome. So this is one of the main reasons that the technology itself is inaccessible for many. When you put the headset on, there is even a lot more pressure on your neck, so some people just can't use it. Simply as that. But the thing for us, for developing VR experiences which are accessible, it's quite simple. Think about the environment you are designing and look at your players and how many times they have to unnaturally look down or up and try to redesign those spaces. Another thing, various body types. When it comes to PC and console games, it's more of the diversity and inclusion topic when it comes to various avatar creators. But when it comes to VR, it's a quite serious problem. Humans come in various shapes and sizes. And when you have holsters in your game, sometimes the default is inaccessible for people. They just can't reach it. So here from Bone Lab, you can be really precise about various parameters of your body. Luckily, they have presets based on shared sizes. And a really cool feature you can see in Green Hell VR, where you can adjust your holsters. This is actually not only comfort of life feature, it's accessibility feature. The problem with holsters, although also in Green Hell VR, is in many games with the holsters placed on back. So think about this movement when you have to take your hand and reach to your back, and also use fine motor skills to grab something. Archery games, so reaching to your quiver, games where you place weapons, or games like Green Hell VR where you have backpack. So a lot of games have this issue. Some kind of ideal situation would be, just change it for a single input. But many times we don't have any inputs left on our controllers. So another possibility to at least partially solve this problem, don't demand from players to be precise with this movement. Maybe put the colliders somewhere here. It's much easier than reaching to your back. And when it comes to various things connected to accessibility and VR, that's all. We can summarize it. So when it comes to mindset, try to take away one barrier and then extend it to as many player groups as possible. Certainly, progress over perfection, that's the thing we are striving for. We have a long way to take in VR, so don't try to be perfect, just start with the small things and build on that. And start early, so you can be accessible by design and you will not need any additional accessible features. What to have in mind? Same old challenges. We have a lot of guidelines when it comes to typical accessibility challenges. We have those challenges in VR also. So a lot of materials there. We can use the good practices. Certainly we have to adapt them, but we have some kind of starting point at least. But there are many things which are specific to VR we have to take into account, and I believe I didn't mention all of them. And that's all, folks. Thank you. Questions? No questions. Now I may think that my talk wasn't...
Actually, there's this game Resident Evil 4 VR, and the developers forgot that it can be also played by people who have breasts. So when you would reach for a magazine, women would just hit their breasts, and some women said they even had like bruises from that, and it took them a few months to fix it. So it's really, it was a thing that for such a developer from, that was developed by a big company like Facebook, they would think of that, but even they didn't. So It just shows how big problem that is. So that's why I think this presentation is very useful.
Holsters are a really prominent problem. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think the some kind of coolest solution was still in Until You Fall. You don't need holsters because many times when it comes to melee combat games, people when they drop their weapons, the first request you will hear, please add holsters. So you have to figure out how to solve the pain there is underneath this request.
And also, there's also great, I think, great solution in Half-Life Alyx where you cannot drop your weapon even. It just doesn't fall out of your hand.
Yeah.
Or if it drops down, it just teleports back to your holster. Because I think the worst thing in VR is having to reach, like, kneel for something. You drop something important, you have to get down on the floor.
It's like if you don't have problems with your spine, you will have.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm thinking if this talk was accessible, maybe it was too tiring.
Maybe do you have other examples or some kind of, cool mistakes made?
From the trenches.
From the trenches. Cool mistake from the trenches. Not sure what I can say or what I can't say. I think basically many problems are still the same. We face the same challenges and in PC and console games. The readability problem and legibility of things in VR is really prominent still. People still are facing problems to just understand the environment. It's not about even some kind of movement, motor skills and other stuff. We are talking about holsters. This is a quite complicated feature and complex feature. It's just about the basics. It's about color schemes, lighting, so people just can't see what is happening in the scene properly and cannot therefore get useful information out of it. So out of trenches, I would say everything is new, but nothing is new in VR when it comes to accessibility. Oh, Christ.
Yes, basically we are working on a daily basis, but still.
Yeah, and now I am afraid because he is asking questions right now.
There was one interesting example I would like to ask about, because you've mentioned Bone Lab, and it has really like in customizable features about body features. But still, when I was playing Bone Lab recently, I realized that they break every rule about subtitles. They are vanishing like in 2 seconds. If you gaze away from them, they are really small, and their contrast is really low. So, what's your production approach or recommendation for accessibility? Should we focus on one certain part of it, or make it less customizable, but to approach every aspect of accessibility?
I would say less is better, like start with the basics, like subtitling, proper subtitling. It doesn't have to have all the cool features like coloring text and so on, and direction indication and so on. Just do the basics properly, I would say, and then focus on delivering other things. But on the opposite, it depends on the priorities. If it makes your game inaccessible at all, yeah, you have to focus at many things at once. But most of the time when it comes to accessibility features, just make the basics correctly. It usually would be really cool, and it will be much more than it's done in most VR games, to be honest.
Okay.
At least for now. At least for now.
I wanted to ask about Jupiter.
I feel grilled.
Because Jupiter Grad looks like a game that should make people nauseous, but it doesn't. So did you have to iterate a lot, or did you somehow get it on the first try? Because it's really magical. I was surprised. It's so good. The movement it doesn't make you feel sick, but it looks like it should.
Yeah, it's more about the simulator sickness, and usually it's treated as a separate topic. It's still, you can treat it as an accessibility topic, but when it comes to simulator sickness, And I think it's not only for Jupitergrad, but one of the explanations for this effect is that you are not taking control from players when it comes to camera, and when it comes to movement, most of the time people don't care. That's most of the time the trick. And the second part of the story is it's not a natural movement. I don't know if you were there actually at the Jupitergrad station and you will come back and play the VR game, you will be noxious for sure.
Did you play the game Swarm? Because it's a very similar.
I had occasion to play it.
And it's also the second game like Jupitergrad that has a very similar movement, but no simulator stickness. So that's
because it's not about the movement itself. It's about what type of control you are taking from player. So if you are leaving them camera, usually it should be fine. And if the movement is not familiar to people, it's also should be fine. Because when it comes to natural movement like walking or running, we have some preconceptions about how it should work actually for us.
Yeah, I think the worst part is acceleration actually. I just played Forklift Simulator from Gamedust, and the worst part was acceleration.
Yep. And I believe in real life, it's also the worst part for many. So there's some kind of... I think it's a good metaphor for what is happening when you are driving a forklift in real life. So I think it was cool, I believe.
They may have done on purpose.
Maybe. Couldn't tell. Okay, cool. I believe that's everyone. Yeah, certainly you can find me during conference. Yeah, and we can talk accessibility. Why not? Thanks all. Take care.